Morning, Andre. Welcome again to this channel. And you are here today to tell us more about public-private partnerships. But before we carry on, I would like you to introduce yourself to our audience because not everybody knows who you are and why in the world I would want to ask you about public-private partnerships.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. So, yeah, I'm an ex-banker. And while at the bank, we did quite a bit of work with governments in South Africa specifically, as well as across the African continent. We also did get involved in public-private partnerships, mostly from a financing perspective. Since I left the bank a few years ago, we started a new training company called PPP Training Online, and we deliver the World Bank developed, now APMG accredited, certified PPP professional courses. Thank you.
Interesting. And for how long have you been presenting these courses?
Well, we were accredited initially in February 2017, so it is just a little bit more than 8 years. So we have trained close to 800 people across the African continent, and we have had people from China, even Russia before the war, many in the Middle East currently. The Middle East and especially the Saudi Arabia are actively pursuing the use of PPP procurement as a procurement mechanism.
Incredible. I didn't know that. That's incredible. So, Andre, now, if people want to know, maybe you can describe to us when is a project a public-private partnership project?
Yeah, it's actually a very good question, and many people trip themselves very easily with this issue. So PPPs, as I've briefly touched on, is an alternative procurement option for governments. So you can either as government procure on a traditional basis, or you could procure on a PPP basis. I'm simplifying it. And within the PPP environment, there's a number of different options, alternatives, and as the world develops, there's more and more PPP procurement options developing, especially in the major very large countries, the developed economies. So when a private sector company uses corporate social investment money to invest in a project, to support youth development, to support housing, many times people will talk about those projects as being public-private partnerships because there's a large private sector donor using its CSI funds to fund the project. Now, that's strictly speaking, well, obviously it is a public-private collaboration, but when we talk about a PPP, it means it's a regulated transaction in a specific country. And there's a regulator in that country, in every country, that has PPP frameworks that oversee and support. Let's say it's a housing project developed on a PPP procurement methodology. In South Africa, it will be the National Housing Finance Corporation, NHFC, that will develop the project, and they will be supported by a PPP unit to help them to do a proper feasibility study, proper tendering, etc., etc. So it's a regulated process. PPPs inherently are a lower risk than a traditional procured project when a government would borrow money to develop a project. So a PPP is when we talk about a regulated PPP, where the PPP unit acts as a regulator as well as an advisory partner to a specific government department. There's 3 criteria for PPPs worldwide. So it's interesting to know that the PPP principles are the same worldwide. In the SADC space, SADC space, these regulations have also been harmonized. So when we do cross-border transactions so that it would be easier. Think about the M4 toll road to Mozambique. It was because the regulations between Mozambique and South Africa has been harmonized, and it was much easier to conclude such a transboundary project. Three key criteria for PPPs. Firstly, is that a project need to be affordable over the life of the project. When we talk about a toll road, it means the toll road will be designed, constructed, and maintained by the private sector, probably for a 30-year period. When we talk about an accommodation projects include schools, office buildings, hospitals, prisons, etc., etc. Those projects, anything between 20 and 30 years. And at the next stage, we will talk about what determines the tenor, the length of a PPP contract. That's quite an interesting discussion. So firstly, a project needs to be affordable over the life of the project. If I can use a office building accommodation project as an example. So if an office building project, and I'm thinking about Tshwane House, our capital city, Tshwane Metro, I think it's a 25-year contract, a little bit under correction there. It means that the private sector will look at Tshwane Metro and at their credit worthiness over a 25-year period. So it's very different from a traditional procured project, and we'll get say a little bit more about that. In a traditional procured project, the private sector will look at a project now and decide if they will co-fund or support the project or whatever is applicable. So firstly, the project has got to be affordable over the life of the project. So if Tshwane Metro needs to pay 10 Rand a month or 100 million a month to the private sector, they will have to do that over the life of the project for that period. The next important issue is that in a PPP, government transfer the bulk of the inherent risks to the project, to the private sector. And that's where the benefit of PPPs step in. Because now the maintenance, any challenges that happen over the period with the toll road, with the prison, with the office buildings are the responsibility of the private sector. So enough about that for now. It's also a topic on its own that we'll get to. And then the third aspect, remember the first one is affordability over the life. The second one was the transfer of significant risks to the private sector. And the third one is that there's got to be value for money. And value for money over the life of the project. So what it means is that during the feasibility stage, the government department or municipality that developed the project need to prove that if the private sector is going to design, build, and maintain the project, that it will be less costly than if government was going to do it. Inherent in most governments' procurement legislation and regulations, the term value for money will be used, meaning that government is obliged always to use either the lowest cost for a project or optimal cost, depending on many aspects. So government is obliged to look for entering into a project contract at potentially at the lowest cost, if that's the criteria. There's also quite a bit of information behind that, and in this session we will expand a little bit on that. Yeah, so there you have it. When it PPP project is recognized as a PPP, when it's regulated by a PPP unit, and then there's three criteria. It's about affordability, risk transfer, and value for money.
Fantastic. Andre, now, what does the transfer of a life cycle risk mean? What does it mean? And then what does the value for money over the period of the project mean?
Can I include the affordability as well? And because I'll start with affordability. So what it means for, let's say, a Tshwane Metro or a Gauteng province, if I think about the Gautrain light rail project, it's about government's ability to afford that project over the life of the project. So in the Gautrain, there's a user payment as well. But if there's any shortfall below the projected ridership of the Gautrain, then the Gauteng province need to step in. And the private sector always want to know that there's sufficient funds available in the Gauteng government budget for that. It's a bit complicated, that one. So let me revert to an accommodation project, like the basic education office accommodation building. So South Africa has got plus 10 office accommodation projects. So let me use the Department of Basic Education, similar to the Tshwane Metro accommodation project. So in that case, the department needs to pay, let's say, 20 million per month to the private sector. That's the starting amount that they need to pay. That amount can only increase over the 25-year, the life of the contracts, with inflation. So in the PPP contract, there's a pre-agreed inflation definition, and every year that 20 million will increase with the identified inflation in the PPP contract. So next year maybe 21 million, the following year maybe 22 million, etc., etc., etc. So the private sector consortium that manage the project need to be certain that those amounts over a 20-year period will be affordable to that department, to that national department. So that is an affordability issue. It's a nice, complicated exercise. And at the start of the project, the cost of the project is full well known. And when the private sector bidders bid, they need to bid below the affordability threshold of a government institution.
I want to ask a question here. Who's responsible for the maintenance of this accommodation or whatever project it is?
And I would guess that in 100% of the PPPs, accommodation PPPs worldwide, that the private sector is responsible for maintenance. And that is the soft and hard maintenance, without going into too much detail, meaning that soft maintenance is the cleaning, maybe a restaurant, etc., cutting the grass, if I can oversimplify, and hard maintenance include the condition of the buildings. So if there are any cracks, any major default in the building structure, private sector's responsibility.
In terms of a hospital?
No, you can go.
In terms of a hospital, the same?
The same.
It's
so in a hospital,
and the highway?
The same. In a highway, the private sector is responsible for maintenance throughout the life of the contract. On a highway, for example, the private sector will have a major upgrade, will have smaller upgrades and maintenance works over the first 4 years. And let's assume in year 5, they've got to have a major upgrade. Maybe they must retar the whole road. I'm just using very simple examples.
Well, that explains to me why our highways are well maintained.
The PPP highways, the highways that have been procured on a PPP basis, yeah. So the N3 running to Durban, the M4 running to Mozambique, and one or two others. Unfortunately, for reasons not well known, government has not entered into any new major road PPP projects. So that's affordability. You asked a question about the transfer of risks to the private sector.
Yes.
So if I can oversimplify, let's use the Department of Basic Education accommodation project. In that project, the private sector is responsible, I'm oversimplifying, to ensure that the temperature in the building is 21 degrees, 24 hours of the day for 25 years. So if anything goes wrong, if the temperature drop, if the temperature increase, if there's a default, a breakage of any of the equipment, it's the private sector's responsibility. If they do not keep the temperature at 21 degrees, and let's say it drops to 19 degrees, there's also in a PPP a built-in penalty regime. So if, let's say there's a condition in the contract that if the temperature drops with 1 degree for longer than an hour, there's an automatic penalty that kicks in. Meaning that instead of receiving 20 million rand, they may now receive 19 million rand. I'm being a bit aggressive with the penalties. And there's a lot of detail behind the penalty regimes as well. you allow the private sector initially a little bit of time to rectify, and if they don't, penalties will then kick in. And there's some very nice examples worldwide where government has withheld money. They don't need to go to court. They can just withhold money if there's specific things not being done by the private sector. So that just on a very high level deal with the transfer of risks and the fact that the private sector assume significant risks. And that's where the value for money comes from. Worldwide, just one statistic without going into too much detail, worldwide, the value for money, that's the next thing we will discuss, the value for money in PPPs is approximately 15%, meaning that the private sector worldwide in PPPs can deliver infrastructure projects potentially at 15% less cost than if government was going to develop the project. The worse government's own, the worse a government's own governance is, the easier it is for the private sector to even come in at a lower cost than the general 15% worldwide. So in many cases, in the developing world, there's great opportunity for governments to save money and to have proper service delivery for the citizens. So I've covered those three things very fast. Yes, you're welcome.
I just want to ask a question here. You know, nowadays, all the sectors in business are sort of riddled with fraud. What security measures is built in here so that no fraudulent transactions can take place? Because I know in government, sometimes they, through procurement, give jobs to their friends, and the friends get a little bit more or much more or too much more for the service that they render.
Yeah, no, it's an excellent question, and PPPs worldwide are also being used to stop fraud. And why? Because we've got regulatory oversight from a body, a PPP unit, that literally check every step of the process. The second oversight discipline that is built into PPPs is the financiers. So let's assume for that Department of Basic Education accommodation, office accommodation project. The winning bidder in that case would have been a large construction company. It would have been a large facilities management company. And then there could be some other private sector companies that joined because there may be specific services required in that project. So let's say there's 5 companies that came together, formed a consortium, and they then approached a bank in South Africa and said, listen, we will put in 10% equity in this project. Let's assume the project was a 100 million project. We will put in 10 or 20 million equity in this project. We want to borrow 80 million to design and build this project and to maintain it over a 25 period. Immediately, the bank will look at the government entity that are bringing that project to market. They will make sure that in the private sector consortium, there's no political conflict. So they will look at all the companies that are participating in the consortium and to see if there are any politically exposed people, any people that should not normally participate in a transaction from a financial and economic perspective. So there's, in South Africa, we've got close to 160 PPP projects, most of them being IPPs, the independent power producing projects, and about 30, 40 of them being, can I call it, traditional PPPs. And I think there is not one of them that has been exposed for fraudulent transactions. There's also oversight, a contract management oversight on these projects for the life of the project. So in the Department of Basic Education, there will be a contract management team. Similar in Tshwane Metro, there will be a contract management team. Now, it could be bigger or smaller. Yeah, enough about that. Yeah, so the opportunity for fraud is much, much less worldwide in a PPP.
That is awesome to know that because one doesn't want to hear of another fraudulent transaction. So, Andre, from a government's perspective, what is the difference between traditional procurement and PPP procurement? I don't know if this is a stupid question, but or maybe you've answered part of it, but could you please help with this?
No. It's good to understand the difference. There's in a situation where the governance is weak in governments, it's very difficult to change track. Governments traditionally worldwide procured on a traditional basis, and that means governments design and develop the specifications for whatever they want to build, be it a road, be it a hospital, be it a fire station, be it whatever. If they don't design the specifications themselves, they will appoint private sector specialists to do that on their behalf. So think about schools. So if you think about schools in South Africa, there's a basic plan that the private sector must use if they are going to build schools in South Africa. And those specifications have been drafted by the private sector specialists on behalf of government. Government will take those, what we call input specifications, put that to the market, and the private sector market will bid now, will tender to deliver, to build the building. They must build it to specifications, even if there's faults in the, or mistakes in the specifications. And there won't easily be mistakes in the specifications, but they must adhere to those specifications. Okay. Now, typically in the specifications, there's very little focus on long-term maintenance. And I'll get back to that point just now. So that is traditional procurement, where you use government specifications. So there's no risk transfer to the private sector. The private sector built it to government specifications, and then maybe there's 6 months or a year where the private sector is still responsible. If anything goes wrong in that year, they must fix it. But in year 2, year 3, year 20, it's the full risk reverts back to government. In a traditional procurement project, governments make use of output specifications. So let me use this example. We have used Swane House as an example. The boardroom, what do you call the big area where the councillors meet in Tshwane Metro? Is it the...
it's a council chamber.
Council chamber. So that council chamber need to accommodate X number of people, 200, whatever the number is. So initially when they did put out the tender, they would have said, we need B grade accommodation for 2,000, 20,000, whatever the number of staff that Swane need to accommodate. They will also say we need a chamber that can accommodate 200 members and make some space available for another 20 in case, or maybe there's visitors, make place for, so you don't tell the private sector what type of cement they should use, what type of air conditioning systems they need to use. You will tell them we need space for X number of people, we need B grade, or A grade. A grade is normally reserved for the very large corporates. None of the public sector buildings should be A grade worldwide, and most are B grade. And there's certain standards adhered to that. But government is not prescriptive even on the design of the building. So it's output specifications. And why that? Because government want the private sector to be responsible for maintenance. They want the private sector to decrease the operational costs over the life of the project. And if you tell them what cement to use and what methods they must use, they can't assume that responsibility. And that's why the private sector can do it at a lesser cost than government, because they will use every innovative product processes to lower the maintenance cost. And during the life of the contract, they will continue to try and lower the maintenance cost. So one trick question, if you will allow me to ask you this, and I don't expect you to necessarily know the answer, but it's more the example. So if an office building cost 100 million rand, what do you guess is the maintenance cost of that building over 20 years compared to the 100? Will it be higher than the 100 or lower?
Oh, I have no idea, but all I can tell you is that government must govern, and they mustn't be they mustn't specialize in maintenance because they can't.
That's a good point.
That's not their core business.
Yeah.
So that would my answer be. I don't know. Maybe you can tell me what the cost.
I'll tell you now. Yeah. No, that's a very good point. So by the way, large private sector companies like banks in South Africa don't own any of their buildings because of this principle. Bankers should not be trying to be clever and maintain their buildings. They've sold it off to pension funds and other investors that want to have long-term income, and they rent it back. And they've got specialized property managers for the pension fund or the investors that will actually maintain these buildings. There's no reason to own the buildings. But anyhow, so, and this answer is also a little bit of a thumbs up. So an office accommodation building that cost 100 million to build over 20 years, I think what I can say confidentially, not confidentially, but with a lot of certainty, is that the maintenance cost will be much higher than the 100. It will probably be 200 or 300 million. So the biggest cost of a building is in the maintenance. It's not in the construction cost. So if governments are also not very well in maintaining their own buildings, that building, instead of lasting 20 or 30 years, will only last 15 years, and the maintenance cost will be extraordinarily high. And that's why the lack of maintenance in water systems, if you take Johannesburg Metro, I believe that they are behind with maintenance more than 100 billion rands already because they haven't maintained. Would that have been a good scenario for a private sector company to have taken the responsibility to manage Joburg Water's assets? I think it's a no-brainer. Potentially, there's a lot of opportunity for the private sector. Yeah, so there you have it. Not many people, and this is an engineering principle, it depends, this ratio between construction and maintenance differs from sector to sector. It is so in a water project, pipes under the ground last much longer, so the maintenance cost percentage is much lower than for a building, etc., etc. But enough about that. Thank you.
Wow, what an eye-opener. Thank you, Andre. I really think I would like to have you come back so that we can talk more about it, because it's very educational, and I'm sure many of our listeners will find this educational. So maybe if you want to, can you tell the listeners where they can, or the viewers, where they can find you and what services do you offer?
Yeah, thank you. So I mentioned briefly at the start that our training company is called PPP Training Online. So you can go onto Google and you should find that relatively easy. So triple P for public-private partnership training online, one word, ppptrainingonline.com. And we deliver the certified PPP professional courses developed by the World Bank Group and now being accredited and overseen by APMG, the International Accreditation Agency. And once you have completed this full qualification, you are known as a PPP professional. And it is internationally accredited, and people worldwide acknowledge the qualification for what it is. Andre at ppptrainingonline.com, you're also welcome to make use of that.
Great, thank you. I just want to ask another question. If a company or a group doesn't necessarily want to have a course to attend or the accreditation, but first want to find out more about PPP, is there such do you give such a interview or course or information session?
Yes, we do. We do. And a very interesting one, if I can use a practical example, is 2-3 years ago when Ethiopia started to become, can I use these words, a little bit more democratic and not as autocratic as they've been for many years. They had a new president at that stage. The Department of Water Affairs in Ethiopia wanted to know more about water PPPs. So we were privileged to go to Ethiopia, and we delivered a Saturday. We can do it. We have done 1-hour sessions. We have done full day sessions. briefing in 2 weeks' time. We're going to Namibia, and we will be helping the PPP committee in Namibia, the decision-making body in Namibia. So not the formal course, but also a little bit more informal, targeted to their specific needs. Yeah, so you're welcome, listeners, to also inquire about any of those options.
So there you have it. Thank you very much, Andre, and enjoy Namibia and informing the people there about PPPs. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye.